I used to think I was a positive person. Right up until the night I found the list I'd written to myself 3 years earlier, and realized I hadn't changed a single thing on it. It was sitting in an old notebook, wedged between tax documents I was supposed to be filing. 10 goals. 10 promises. And next to every single one, still unchecked, still waiting. At the time, I was 34, working as an operations manager for a mid-sized logistics company in Ohio. Nothing dramatic about my life. I paid my bills, showed up to work early, said the right things in meetings. If you'd asked my coworkers, they'd have told you I was reliable. Steady. The guy who never rocked the boat. What they didn't know was that every night, after everyone left, I sat in my car in the parking lot for a few extra minutes before driving home. Not doing anything. Just sitting there, staring at the dashboard, feeling this low hum of dissatisfaction I couldn't explain. I had convinced myself it was normal. Everyone feels a little empty sometimes, right? That's just adulthood. I told myself I wanted to change things. I read the books. I highlighted the right passages. I nodded along to podcasts about mindset and habits and discipline. I even tried, for about 2 weeks at a time, to wake up earlier, eat better, apply for that promotion I kept saying I deserved. And every time, without fail, I'd slide back into the same groove within a month. I chalked it up to willpower. I told myself I just needed to try harder. That's the part nobody warns you about, how convincing your own excuses can sound when they're coming from inside your own head. The strange part started with my coworker, Denise. She worked 2 desks down from me, and for years she'd been what I considered unremarkable. Quiet, competent, never pushed for anything. Then, out of nowhere, she got promoted to regional coordinator. Not because she'd suddenly worked harder, she'd always worked hard, but because something about her had shifted. She spoke differently in meetings. She stopped apologizing before she gave her opinion. She started saying things like, "I'm going to bring this up with corporate," instead of, "Maybe someone should mention this to corporate." It bothered me more than I wanted to admit. I remember thinking, what changed? She didn't get a new degree. She didn't get some big lucky break. She just became a different version of herself, seemingly overnight. I asked her about it one afternoon, half joking, in the break room. I said something like, "You've been on a roll lately. What's your secret?" She looked at me for a second, like she was deciding whether I actually wanted the answer or was just being polite. Then she said, "I stopped arguing with the part of me that already believed I couldn't." I laughed it off. It sounded like something from one of those self-help accounts online. But it stuck with me in a way I didn't expect. I kept turning the sentence over in my head on the drive home. I stopped arguing with the part of me that already believed I couldn't. What did that even mean? I brought it up with my brother a few weeks later, mostly because I didn't know who else to say it to without sounding ridiculous. He's a few years younger than me, works in a completely different field, but he's always been more comfortable talking about this kind of thing. He said something that caught me off guard. He said, "You keep trying to change your life at the level of your actions. But your actions aren't the problem. They're just symptoms." I didn't understand him at first. I said, "So what am I supposed to change, if not what I do?" He said, "What you believe when nobody's watching." I remember feeling a small flash of irritation. It sounded too simple, almost like a dodge. I wanted a strategy, a system, something with steps. Instead I got a sentence that felt more like a riddle. But that night, sitting in my car again in that same parking lot, I decided to actually test it. Not change my schedule. Not download another productivity app. Just notice, honestly, what I believed about myself underneath all the positive things I said out loud. And what I found wasn't pretty. Underneath the "I'm working on myself and I just need more discipline," there was a much older, much quieter belief. Something like, people like me don't get the good version of life. We get stability, if we're lucky. We don't get chosen. We don't get to stand out. I didn't know where it came from exactly. Maybe pieces of it came from growing up watching my parents work themselves thin without much to show for it. Maybe pieces came from being the kid who was told to be realistic instead of ambitious. It didn't matter where it started. What mattered was that I'd been running my whole adult life on a program I never consciously installed, and never consciously questioned. That was the moment something shifted. Not because I suddenly believed something different, that would come slower, and less dramatically than I expected. It shifted because for the first time, I saw the difference between what I said I wanted and what I actually, quietly expected to happen. And I realized every time I tried to change my habits before, I was fighting against that deeper expectation, like trying to grow a plant in soil that was already poisoned. I started paying attention to the small moments instead of trying to overhaul everything at once. When an opportunity came up at work, a project lead position nobody wanted to volunteer for, I noticed the immediate thought in my head, someone more capable will step up. I noticed it. I didn't scold myself for having it. I just asked, quietly, is that actually true, or is that just familiar? I volunteered for the project anyway. Not because I suddenly felt confident. I still felt the same nervous, uncertain version of myself. But I stopped waiting to feel ready before I acted, because I finally understood that the feeling of readiness was never going to arrive on its own. It had to be built, slowly, through evidence I gave myself. The strange thing is, nothing about my external life changed quickly. I didn't get promoted the next month. My finances didn't transform overnight. If you'd filmed my daily routine, it would have looked almost identical to before. What changed was internal, and it was subtle enough that I almost didn't notice it happening. I stopped narrating my life through the lens of "not yet" and "maybe someday." I started noticing how often I talked myself out of things before I even gave them a chance, and I started catching that pattern in real time instead of realizing it 3 days later. A few months in, my brother asked me how things were going. I told him honestly, nothing had exploded into some new dramatic version of success. But something quieter had happened. I didn't dread Sunday nights the way I used to. I didn't sit in the parking lot as long. When I made a mistake at work, I noticed myself recovering faster, without spiraling into the old story of, "This proves I'm not good enough." He said something I still think about. He said, "That's what changes first. Not your results. Your relationship with yourself." It took me a long time to actually believe that. I'd spent years assuming that confidence was something you earned after success, like a reward you got once you proved yourself. What I hadn't considered was that most of us are unconsciously proving old beliefs right, long before we ever get the chance to prove anything new. Denise, it turned out, had gone through something similar a year before I even noticed the change in her. She told me later that she'd spent most of her 20s assuming she wasn't the kind of person who got taken seriously, and it took a small, uncomfortable moment of honesty with herself to realize that belief wasn't a fact. It was just a rule she had agreed to, without ever remembering agreeing to it. I think about that list I found in the notebook sometimes. 10 goals, all unchecked for 3 years. Not because I was lazy, and not because I lacked ambition. Because I had been trying to build a different life on top of the same quiet, unexamined belief about who I was allowed to become. I still don't think change happens the way it's usually described, fast, dramatic, obvious to everyone around you. I think it happens in the moments nobody sees. The moment you notice a thought instead of obeying it. The moment you ask yourself, quietly, whether what you believe about yourself is actually true, or just old. I wonder sometimes how many people are living entire lives, working hard, trying honestly, while still following instructions they never remember giving themselves. What would change, if you actually looked?